Welcome back to the deep dive. We are continuing our journey through the, let's call it the administrative reality of intellectual property. And today, that means the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure.
The MPEP itself.
We've talked a lot about how getting a patent is really just the first step, the long-term value. Well, that comes from maintaining it.
Right.
Which brings us to Chapter 2500. It's the rule book for maintenance fees, basically how you make sure your patent stays alive and enforceable after it's issued.
And it's a critical chapter.
And today we are zooming in on one very specific, very short section, MPEP Section 2595, Forms.
And I know what you're thinking when you hear forms. It sounds dry.
It sounds incredibly dry.
Yeah.
But this short section is kind of the administrative nexus of the whole operation, right? It's the part that directs you to the exact tools you need to manage these huge payments and, more importantly, prevent a complete lapse of your patent rights.
That is the perfect way to put it. For anyone listening, a practitioner or a patent owner, the mission for today is simple, but it's absolutely vital. We need to understand that compliance isn't just about, cutting a check. Right. It's about using the correct standardized procedural infrastructure. It's about using the right forms so that payment and all your communication is documented correctly. We're essentially mapping out the toolkit the USPTO gives you to stay in good standing.
And to prevent those lapses that could cost, well, millions.
Easily.
Okay, let's get right into it. Let's start with what you've called the two pillars of maintenance fee management, the core forms.
We can start with the money side of things. That's the Maintenance Fee Transmittal Form, PTO SB 45.
The SB 45.
Yes, and its purpose seems obvious, but it is fundamentally important. When you're submitting that fee payment, and remember, these are significant amounts of money we're talking about, paid at the 3.5, 7.5, and 11.5 year marks.
Yeah, these aren't small checks.
Not at all. So you have to ensure that money is correctly processed and, crucially, associated with the one single correct patent record.
The form is basically the metadata for the money.
That's a great way to think about it. The SB 45 gives you all the standardized fields you need. The patent number, which payment window you're in, the amount being paid. Without that standardization, just imagine the chaos.
Especially with bulk submissions, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Or payments from overseas that need currency conversion. The accounting becomes a nightmare, and it's ripe for errors. Applying funds to the wrong patent, a partial payment getting rejected. The form turns a simple payment into a legally recognized compliant action.
So what happens if you just send a check? With the patent number scribbled on the memo line, but no SB 45, does the USPTO just try to figure it out?
Well, they have to try, but they're not your accounting department. If
No.
they can't clearly identify what that money is for which patent, which fee window, they can just reject it.
And a rejection means you missed the deadline.
It means the payment wasn't timely received. And just like that, you're in the grace period, which costs more, or even worse, your patent has expired. The SB 45 is your insurance policy against that kind of procedural ambiguity.
Okay, that covers the money. What's the other pillar?
The other pillar is communication. And this, arguably, is where most accidental patent lapses actually come from.
Ew.
Absolutely. This is the Fee Addresses Indication Form, PTO SB 47.
SB 47. And its purpose is?
This form allows the patent owner to officially designate a specific correspondence address only for maintenance fee communications.
Okay, I can see why that's useful. But why is it so necessary to isolate the fee address? I mean, doesn't the patent already have a correspondence address on file, usually with the lawyer who prosecuted it?
It does, and that's exactly the problem. Patent prosecution and patent maintenance are very often handled by completely different people. The prosecution lawyer's job is done once the patent issues. That law firm might dissolve, the client might move on, their file gets closed.
And the reminders from the USPTO.
If you don't file an SB 47, those critical fee reminder notices will just keep going to that old correspondence address.
Into a black hole, potentially.
Precisely. The SB 47 is the tool you use to carve out those specific notices and send them where they need to go. Usually that's an in-house IP docketing team or a dedicated annuity service that handles these payments.
But hold on, couldn't that create its own problems?
Really?
If you isolate the fee address, you're creating a silo. What if the general counsel for the company, who handles licensing, is now completely in the dark about the fee status because the maintenance team drops the ball?
That's a very legitimate concern, and it really just speaks to the need for rock-solid internal procedures. From the USPTO's perspective, they're just trying to establish a single, reliable point of contact for these high-stakes reminders.
They're managing their own risk.
Exactly. The risk management then falls squarely back on you, the patent owner. You have to make sure the address on that SB47 is monitored constantly. You have to ensure that handoff from the prosecution attorney to the maintenance administrator was perfect.
So if you don't file the SB47, you're basically leaving the life of your patent in the hands of a previous and maybe now uninterested party.
You've created a known procedural cliff edge. Yes.
That makes the SB47 seem less like an option and more like a mandatory safety step.
Yeah.
It's the first line of defense against just losing your patent to a misdirected letter.
That's it exactly. These forms, SB45 and SB47, they create predictability. And predictability allows for scale.
Which is the perfect transition. Because if we need to talk about scaling this up, let's shift to entities managing not just one patent, but huge portfolios.
Right. When you're talking hundreds or even thousands of patents, administrative efficiency isn't a convenience anymore. It's a survival mechanism.
So how do these forms play into that?
This is where we see the interplay with broader administrative tools that the MPEP references, specifically customer number practice.
Which is managed with another form.
Of course. Form PTO 125.
And what does this do?
Think about a large company or a big law firm. If they have to update their address or phone number or power of attorney across hundreds of different patent files, that's a monumental task.
And a huge risk for errors.
A huge risk. So the SB125 is what you use to request a customer number. It's a unique identifier that's tied to your firm or company, and it holds all that contact data in one place.
So if the firm moves, they don't file 300 change of address forms. They just update the one customer number.
That's the core benefit, yes. It streamlines correspondence, but this is where it gets a little procedurally tricky, and it links right back to maintenance fees.
How so?
The USPTO has a very specific hierarchy for which address they use. And if a customer number is listed on a patent, that address gets strong procedural preference.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
It means that if you haven't filed that specific fee address form, the SB47,
Then the maintenance fee notices are going to go to the general address listed under the customer number, which might be the law firm, not the client's internal team.
that's the trap. The MPEP guidance is clear on this. The customer number address will be chosen over a simple typed correspondence address. So this great efficiency tool, the SB125, suddenly becomes a potential liability if your internal processes are sloppy.
So the law firm gets the efficiency, but they also take on the responsibility of making sure they file the SB47 to redirect those specific financial notices.
They absolutely must, or they have to be prepared to receive those notices and forward them immediately. The administrative shortcut creates a new procedural dependency.
It's fascinating. The bureaucracy's need for efficiency creates these unintended pressure points. It really drives home that navigating Chapter 2500 isn't just about the law, it's about mastering the administrative hierarchy.
It forces diligence, but what happens when, despite all of this diligence, you've got your SB45, your SB47, your SB125 all lined up, but a human error happens. A deadline is missed, a patent expires.
Right, that brings us to the ultimate safety net, the high wire act for when everything else fails.
We are now talking about the highest stakes form in this entire chapter, Form PTO SB66.
The name says it all, really. Petition to accept unintentionally delayed payment of maintenance fee in an expired patent.
This is more than just paperwork. As you said, this is a plea for reinstatement. It's the mechanism to bring an expired patent back from the dead.
So what's the actual hurdle here? What do you need to show them?
The legal standard is incredibly strict. It's governed by 37 CFR 1.378b. The patent owner has to prove conclusively that the delay in payment was unintentional. That is the key.
And unintentional doesn't just mean I forgot.
Not even close. It's a term of art. It's not the same as gross negligence or, deliberately letting it lapse and then changing your mind.
So what does the proof look like?
The SB66 has to be filed with a full explanation, usually an affidavit or a declaration that lays out the entire story of the delay. What steps did you normally take to prevent this? When did you find out about the lapse? What did you do the second you found out?
So they're looking for evidence of good practice.
They're looking for evidence of ordinary business diligence and proof that this lapse was a genuine aberration, a breakdown that was outside the owner's immediate control.
Can you give us a sense of what might fly versus what wouldn't? Where's that line procedurally?
The line is thin. An unintentional delay could be, say, a docketing error when migrating to a new software system, or a payment was mailed on time but got lost by the postal service. The key is proving you intended to maintain the patent all along.
And what fails that test?
If the record shows you just ignored a bunch of reminders, that's not going to work. Or if the whole mess happened because you never filed an SB 47 and let the notices pile up at your old lawyer's office, that
Mhm.
looks a lot more like a lack of diligence.
Negligence, basically.
And that generally fails the unintentional standard. The USPTO director has a lot of discretion here, and the evidence has to be strong.
But for a valuable patent, the cost of filing the SB 66, the late fees, the surcharges, the legal help, it's nothing compared to losing the entire asset.
Nothing. And it's important to remember, the MPE is constantly being updated on these procedures. Section 2590, which covers delayed payments, specifically manages the requirements for the SB 66. The USPTO polices this safety net very carefully,
It's a highly scrutinized process.
designed to offer relief only for genuine, documented mistakes. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad management.
So the timely submission of a correct Form PTO SB 66, backed up by a strong legal declaration, is the last procedural tool standing between an innovative asset and just becoming public domain.
It is the ultimate testament to procedural rigor. There's no coming back from a failure at this stage.
Okay, let's zoom back out. For the listener trying to get their arms around all this,
Yeah.
what is the single overarching takeaway from Section 2595?
The main theme is that Section 2595 is essentially the index to your compliance toolkit. It's brief, but it points you to the precise, standardized forms you need for every single part of the maintenance fee process described in Chapter 2500. It takes the vague idea of paying fees and turns it into a concrete set of steps.
So it's the instruction manual.
It is. And the final instructional takeaway for you is this. Compliance starts and ends with having the right form in your hand. If you're managing any IP, you have to understand and correctly use the PTO SB 45 for your payments, the SB 47 for communication, the SB 125 for portfolio efficiency, and as your absolute last resort, the PTO SB 66.
These aren't just administrative suggestions.
They are not optional niceties. They were procedural necessities. They are the tools that ensure the continuity and the legal validity of your patent rights.
And we've tried to provide that shortcut today, laying out exactly which of these administrative forms build the guardrails that protect your investment in innovation. It's such a good reminder that in patent law, it's the meticulous, sometimes tedious adherence to procedure that really defines success.
It truly is.
So a final thought for you to take away. If the fate of groundbreaking innovation really does hinge on these very specific administrative forms, most of which were designed for a paper-based world, how might the rapid evolution of electronic filing systems change things? How could they streamline or even automate this process, maybe minimizing our reliance on specific form numbers? And on the other side of that coin, what new administrative complexities, what new digital procedural traps might that evolution introduce? Something to mull over.
That's a great question.
We would like to extend a special thank you to Mike Shepard, the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
This summary of the MPEP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and NotebookLM, and may contain errors or omissions. It is provided for general educational and informational purposes only, and is not legal advice or substitute for formal instruction. For authoritative guidance, consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or a registered patent practitioner.